asana or the postures that we see is really only about 5% of yoga. And that I find that it's really important to educate and teach people that yoga is an entire science and it's a life science, and that it does help us if we have trauma. It does help us if we're having addiction issues. This is just as relevant for my life, and that's part of how I've utilized it. But I love teaching people and letting people know that yoga and the whole science of yoga is there as really a support for life, for whole person health and vitality. I accepted the role as the director of the Soul of Yoga Institute because it's probably the most inspired and inspiring role I could play. It's so important to me that yoga is taught properly and taught well. And I don't mean that in a dogmatic sense, but what I find is in the world today, there's a lot of more westernized forms of yoga that we're seeing, which I think one of the gifts of yoga is how it's so dynamic and it wants to evolve and grow. But in that, with certain places, I've seen the abandonment of the roots of yoga and what the essence really is. And so even the idea of the soul of yoga always brings me back to we're working from the essence and we're seeing where yoga wants to go. And so because this is such a strong institute, the Soul of Yoga is such a strong institute, it's the program I went through and it raised the bar. It actually made other programs really hard for me to go through. And that's me, just my own experience as a student. It was such a high bar in that the integrity and the specializations and the mentorship and the teachers were so impressive. And so being able to be in a position to ensure that students are getting the best of the best education that they can in the world of yoga is everything to me. And I get to play a part of that is completely aligned with my fulfillment of my lifetime. I find that one of the main ways to really become an expert at anything is to have the experience of it. So it's one thing to gain a lot of information and have knowledge, but it's an entirely different thing when it's something that you really have to embody and you have to practice, which is why we call a lot of our things practices, right? But I didn't know that I was practicing. I just knew that I needed a life raft, and that's what I was given. And now I know to call it a practice, but it was my yoga practice that really saved me. And so I sort of, not knowing it, was becoming a subject matter expert in things like Ayurveda and subtle anatomy and yoga philosophy in particular, because it was what I needed, and I needed to practice it. And then it became a lot easier and much more inspired for me to want to share it with other people.